go to the phones and GOP political strategist, also co-founder of MustReadTexas.com, Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you?
Hey, Chad. Good morning.
Let's see here. Iowa 2016. It looks as though the official campaign season is underway. What did you take away from all the news out of Iowa over the weekend?
Yeah, you had a cattle call there in Des Moines, on Saturday, and I caught, I'd say 2/3 of it or so on C-SPAN. What's amazing is you had 8 or 9 serious candidates there speaking, but you still had 4 or 5 that weren't there.
Right. Yeah.
To have a list that long, and you still had 4 or 5, first-year candidates who weren't there. I mean, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio, obviously Jeb and Mitt were both not there. Mm-hmm. You have some other governors like Mike Pence and John Kasich who weren't there. So, the list seems to be growing, every couple days in terms of the 2016 field. Now, in terms of the Texans, Cruz and Perry both did well. I mean, that was a Cruz crowd of really conservative, grassroots activists, over, I think, 1,000 of them. Cruz gave, his red meat, stump speech, which he updates periodically as things change, but he delivers it sort of contemporaneously, but with amazing sort of repetition, right? It's unbelievable how he's able to kind of recreate a stump speech with no notes and no teleprompter. Yeah. But he got a thunderous response. Perry was good too. I wouldn't say his response was as strong as Cruz's, but it was strong enough that he's got to feel good about being there and how it went. And I know he stayed an additional day and had a series of events in Iowa on Sunday. So look, this thing remains a jump ball, and Iowa's going to be a real free for all.
Do you run into a problem if you're the Republicans of having too many people run?
Do you run into a problem in terms of the candidates?
Yeah, if it's too many people running and everyone's beating up on each other, do you run into a problem there?
I think you could, and it's interesting. I mean, if you really do have 8 or 10 or 12 serious candidates, the question for me is when and how is the field going to narrow? Usually the Iowa straw poll in August narrows the field. If you remember, it forced Tim Pawlenty out of the field last time, mm-hmm. And he was a serious candidate. It also brought the addition of Rick Perry in right after the Iowa straw poll. So, if you really do have 8 or 10, 12 candidates, I don't know. I mean, I remain convinced that there's not going to be enough money for that many candidates to run through Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. I just don't think that the resources are going to be there. I think that the resources are going to focus on 3 or 4 people, and I would think that Jeb would definitely have those kinds of resources, and Mitt Romney would. Looks increasingly clear that Chris Christie's running. So what I think is really interesting here, Chad, is that the establishment side of the bracket is going to be just as competitive as the conservative side. Yeah. And, in fact, I think the establishment side will be better funded. So you're going to have the establishment side with the establishment candidates attacking each other and competing for the same voters and the same media attention and the same donors. But they're going to be doing it on television, whereas I think the conservatives are going to be doing it, candidate forums and on radio and, cheaper modes of voter contact. So, look, again, I can't stress how I think wide open this thing is. I'll add one last thing on Iowa, and this is, I think, seen in a lot of the media coverage. I think Scott Walker did have a very good weekend. Yeah. Perhaps he had low expectations. He's had this sort of rap as being a conservative warrior, but kind of a, Tim Pawlenty, no charisma, mediocre speech giver. And he really got, beat that rap and, got rid of that idea over the weekend. He gave a pretty impassioned speech. He got a great response. He showed a lot of different qualities I think the people in Iowa want to see. And so he was really, I think he and Cruz were probably the 2 biggest winners of the weekend.
Visiting with Matt Mackowiak, there was another forum that was held where you had Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio all on the same stage. Do you think all 3 of those guys will run?
Boy, I'm as close to 100% convinced that Cruz and Paul are running as you can be. I was really kind of fairly confident Rubio wasn't going to run, but the indications over the last 2 weeks are that he's going to. He's skipping votes in the United States Senate all week to raise money, mostly in California, which is a pretty serious indication of what he's trying to do. And he had his donor retreat in Miami on Saturday and Sunday before he flew out to California for that Sunday evening forum. Look, I watched that entire forum online, and I thought all three candidates were strong. Rubio and Cruz are both more aligned on foreign policy,
right?
Than Rand Paul is, and Rand was, I think, caught out on an island on a couple things. He detailed why he opposes the Iran sanctions bill, which probably makes him, one of the only Republicans in the Senate that opposes it. But they all three were, extraordinarily substantive and confident and conservative in how they answered the question. So, yeah, if you just look at it and say if those three candidates were the only three candidates, we would have a strong field. It would be very competitive and well-funded race. Mm-hmm. But that's not even 1/3 of the field. You honestly are going to have 3 or 4 or 5 governors, 3 senators, and a number of former elected officials. So you're going to have 10 or 12 serious candidates here. It's going to really be unbelievably unpredictable.
What do you think about the articles that have come out really in the last couple of days talking about Ron Paul and whether or not Rand will have an issue with some of the things that Ron Paul has been saying lately? Do you think that's a liability for Rand?
I do. And I think that's a liability in a couple different ways. One is, the sins of the father are often, paid for by the son, and whether that's fair or not, that just sort of is the reality. Look, Rand Paul would not be a United States Senator were it not for his dad. I'm not saying that his dad put him there, but he wouldn't have been able to gain the national attention that he did and the small dollar fundraising, and the libertarian, street cred, all of that he built he built it himself, but he started on, let's say second base because of what his dad had done for 30 years. That's true for the presidential race as well. One of Rand Paul's strengths in Iowa is he starts as the inheritor of his father's coalition in Iowa, which I think by 10 votes came up short of winning the Iowa straw poll last time when Bachmann narrowly won it. So now to your question, yes, look, the Ron Paul universe is fraught with problems. It's not just secession, which has gotten some attention. He made some secession comments recently. There's some racism, anti-Semitism issues there. There's some very goofy financing and fundraising techniques. There's a lifetime of comments that he's made,
right.
And I'm not saying Rand has to defend all of them, but he's going to have to defend some of them. And every time he distances himself from his father, he distances himself from a libertarian coalition that only he can win and can run with in the presidential campaign. So it's an advantage and a disadvantage. It cuts both ways for Rand Paul. And I don't know how you distance yourself from your father, but he's going to have to do that to some extent.
Visiting with Matt Mackowiak. Matt, before we let you go, let's take a quick look at what's happening down in Austin. And right now it's a quiet time, and some Senate committee, committee chairs were appointed and all that. But the question I have for you is the dynamic between Dan Patrick and Greg Abbott. You have so many articles that are out there now saying that it's the Dan Patrick era, that Dan Patrick will overshadow Greg Abbott. Do you go along with that thinking, or is it way too early to tell?
I think it's a little bit too early to tell. I think, yes. I think Patrick has been a little bit, more public and perhaps more showy than Abbott has been in the initial days. But keep in mind that in a new administration where you have a new governor and a lieutenant governor, the lieutenant governor's office is more powerful. The power of the governor of Texas, it grows with time.
Right.
That's why Perry was so powerful after 14 years. The only powers that the governor of Texas really has is to set the issues in a special session or set emergency items in a regular session, veto bills, and appoint people. Okay. And you know, the veto power you have for, 10 days or 12 days or something at the end of every session. And the appointment power is something that grows over time. And so after 14 years, Perry had appointed every single person in the state government. As of today, Greg Abbott has appointed like 9 people in government. But that's going to grow into hundreds and into thousands over time. Whereas Patrick, he's appointing Senate chairs. He was able to push through changing the threshold in the Texas Senate, which is very, very important from 2/3 to 3/5. So yeah, I think Patrick is going to be a very strong lieutenant governor and a very public one. But he only controls the Senate. You still have to have the House, and you still have to have Abbott's support in terms of him signing bills. So the Patrick-Abbott relationship is going to be closely watched and much gossiped about, but it's going to be very important because if they're not on the same page, neither one of them are as powerful as they'd like to be.
Matt, tell folks what they can find on mustreadtexas.com today.
Yeah, session getting underway, so good amount of coverage there of the inaugural and some of the initial things that are happening. Also, a lot of coverage over the Texans in Iowa over the weekend. You can find it all at mustreadtexas.com.
All right, and as always, follow Matt on Twitter at Matt Mackowiak. Matt, as always, thank you very much.
Thanks, buddy.